الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن سار سبيله إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. So as we continue discussing the book Bulugh al-Maram by Hafiz Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani rahimahullah ta'ala, and we're still discussing the chapter of Kitab al-Tahara, and we're discussing in specific what he titled Bab Ghusl wa Hukum al-Junub. So matter that pertain to Ahkam al-Ghusl, this washing that is to take place, religious washing to take place, and also Ahkam that relates to al-Junub, the person that falls in a state of Janaba. What are things to be done in such cases? So today we'll be discussing two hadith relating to of those things regarding ghusl, which is mujibat al-ghusl, those things that certain action that may require ghusl to be performed and go along with it. And of those action they discuss, as we discussed the hadith, salatul juma. So regarding al-ghusl, the one who wish to attend salatul juma, of those things that the person should be mindful of is regarding matters pertaining to al-ghusl. Is it wajib, not wajib? So we discussed the hadith that is mentioned by the author rahimahullah ta'ala, and we'll discuss two hadith, the first hadith of Abu Sa'id Al-Khudri and the second hadith of Sumara that discuss this particular topic regarding Al-Ghusl, Yawm al-Jum'ah. So we'll have the hadith read and we go into discussing the hadith in more detail.
Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. Hadith 100, narrated Abu Sa'id Al-Khudri radiyallahu anhu. Allah's Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, taking a bath on Friday is a must for every adult. Reported by As-Sab'a. Hadith 101, narrated Sumara radiyallahu anhu. Allah's Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, whoever performs ablution on the day of Jum'ah has done a good thing, and whoever takes a bath, taking a bath is better for him. Reported by Al-Khamsa and At-Tirmidhi, graded it Sahih, graded it Hasan, good.
So those are two hadith that are mentioned regarding this discussion regarding Hukum, Ghusl, Salatul Jum'ah. So the first hadith that is mentioned, Abu Sa'id Al-Khudri radiyallahu anhu, أن رسول الله عليه السلام قال غسل الجمعة واجب على كل محتلم أخرجه السبعة. Then the second hadith that he mentioned, and Sumara radiyallahu anhu قال قال رسول الله عليه السلام من توضأ يوم الجمعة فبها ونعمة ومن اغتسل فالغسل أفضل ورواه خمسة وحسنه الترمذي. So this is the hadith that he mentioned. These two hadith are what to be covered. So he mentioned these two hadith regarding some of the ahkam that relates to ghusl yawm al-jum'ah. So as for what we'll discuss first, that he mentioned, that with Shaykh Abdullah Fawzan in his explanation, that the system that we follow will have at times explain something about the Sahabi, or mention something about the Sahabi. If he's been mentioned for the first time, then after we'll have takhrij of the hadith, some discussion regarding the grading of the hadith based upon what has been mentioned by the ulama and also the author himself. And then we go into the aqwal of the ulama regarding some of the masail, some of the matters that can be taken from the hadith, and also of the benefits that can be taken from the hadith. So as for these two hadith that we have mentioned, the first hadith of the hadith of Abu Sa'id Al-Khudri and the second hadith of Sumara. So as for the first hadith that they mentioned here, that they mentioned Abu Sa'id Al-Khudri. So the first thing that we'll discuss regarding Abu Sa'id Al-Khudri, as for the hadith they mentioned, as the author mentioned, akhrajahu As-Sab'a. So Ibn Hajar rahimahullah ta'ala, that in the introduction of the book, the start of the book, that he has his own mustalahat, he has his own terminology that he used in this book. So he mentioned As-Sab'a, and what he intend by Sab'a, that is this hadith, it goes back to 7 books. So as for what is mentioned, so as we also would strike some what is mentioned by some of those who have put some work on this book. So of those who have worked on the book is Sheikh Samir, that when he mentioned this particular hadith, that of Abu Sa'id, that he says the hadith As-Sab'a, when he mentioned akhrajahu As-Sab'a, then he commented regarding what are those Sab'a. He mentioned 1, Bukhari, Muslim, Abu Dawud, Nasai, Ibn Mاجه, وأحمد. So these are the ones that he mentioned regarding hadith in the As-Sab'a. So he mentioned Bukhari, Muslim, Abu Dawud, Nasa'i, Ibn Mاجه, وأحمد. Then some other matter that to be discussed. But Ibn Hajar rahimahullah ta'ala, so he mentioned these are the source of this hadith. So Ibn Hajar rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentioned As-Sab'a. So As-Sab'a, the 7 books of hadith, what he intends by this is Bukhari, Muslim, Abu Dawud, Tirmidhi, Nasa'i, Ibn Mاجه, and Ahmad. So these are 7 books. So he mentioned that the hadith, by way of this hadith, should be able, this hadith can be found in those 7 books. But for what is mentioned here by Sheikh Samir in when he's checking of the book, he mentioned, as for these 7, he mentioned Bukhari, Imam Muslim, Abu Dawud, Nasa'i, Ibn Mاجه, and Ahmad, with the exception of At-Tirmidhi. So he did not mention Tirmidhi, but Imam Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, when he mentioned As-Sab'a, then also it is Kutubu Sitta plus Ahmad. So Kutubu Sitta, as we know, is Bukhari, Muslim, Abu Dawud, Tirmidhi, Nasa'i, Ibn Mاجه. But he mentioned that, and he says regarding that Tambih in Samir, and also he mentioned Tambih, Wahm al-Hafid, that Ibn Hajar rahimahullah ta'ala, that he made an error. So there's an error on the part of Ibn Hajar rahimahullah ta'ala, that when he mentions hadith by saying As-Sab'a, he mentioned that rahimahullah ta'ala fi ghazwihi al-hadith للترمذي, then he mentioned that today is not there. So he made an error in him attributing this hadith to At-Tirmidhi, as the hadith is not found in Tirmidhi rahimahullah ta'ala in his collection. So the hadith, even though he mentioned Sab'a, that's what he mentioned, but there's an error where that includes At-Tirmidhi, but the hadith in reality is not found in At-Tirmidhi. So that's an error by way of Ibn Hajar rahimahullah ta'ala, and most of those who somewhat have checked the book, or many who have highlighted this error on the part of Ibn Hajar. So we mentioned before that is important regarding that Ibn Hajar rahimahullah ta'ala, that being an imam of hadith, but at times we make error. At times we make error. So he mentioned that that's of the point that he raised regarding that matter, that As-Sab'a is actually hadith is in mentioned As-Sab'a, what may be more precise, As-Sab'a illa khala or illa At-Tirmidhi. The hadith is in the 7 books with the exception of Tirmidhi. But he mentioned that, so they mentioned concerning the hadith in Bukhari, Muslim, and Kutubu Sab'a, then not much discussion regarding the authenticity of the hadith. As for the second hadith, with the hadith of Sumara ibn Jundub rahimahullah ta'ala, that Sheikh Abdullah Fawzan, that he mentioned regarding Sumara ibn Jundub, that he mentioned that that this is the Sahabi who is Ibn Hilal Fazari. Ibn Hilal Fazari. So it is Sumara ibn Jundub ibn Hilal Fazari. And he mentioned that from the Al-Ansar, and mentioned that his mother brought him to Medina as a boy after his father passed away. So his mom brought him to Medina and settled there after the death of his father. Then also he mentioned that as a young boy that he grew up, and some that he have many hadith, and he mentioned that there was an incident concerning one of the battles, that himself and another young man, teenager, that they wanted to participate in the battle. So the Prophet ﷺ, they mentioned the Prophet ﷺ that he allowed the other young person to participate, then he did not allow Sumara. Then Sumara rahimahullah mentioned that if I was able to wrestle with this person, this other young person, then I was able to defeat him. I can wrestle him. Then the Prophet ﷺ told him, okay, did so, and he did. Then he allowed him to participate in the battle. So it shows. So they mention that of the things regarding that Sahabi Samura, and that his hadith is mentioned. Hadith that he has, that they are mentioned, that there are many, and also that he took certain responsibility during the Khilafah of those who came after the Prophet ﷺ. So in the Khilafah, as they mentioned, time of he was appointed in the time of Ziyad, that he was, and also in Muawiyah, that he was appointed as like a governor of Basra. So he was appointed a governor of Basra for a while, and then it mentioned that he removed himself from the position, vacated that position of being the appointment, but he remained in Basra until he passed away, rahimahullah ta'ala, anhu. And it mentioned, they said that he died the 58th year of Al-Hijri. So the 50th year of the Hijrah, he passed away, Sumara ibn Jundub, rahimahullah ta'ala anhu. So that's concerning brief regarding that particular Sahabi. Then as for this particular hadith regarding what is said regarding the hadith, that the hadith of Samura, that they mentioned that as for this particular hadith, that the hadith can be found, that is in, as they mentioned here, the hadith, Ibn Hajar rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentioned the hadith of Rasulullah, Rawahu Al-Khamsa wa Hasanahu At-Tirmidhi. So the hadith is collected in 5 books of hadith, as he mentioned, and we mentioned those 5 books, and he mentioned also added to this that At-Tirmidhi rahimahullah ta'ala all the hadith to be Hasan. Then as for that discussion regarding this matter, that the second hadith that is mentioned, the hadith of Samura, that Sheikh Samir, he mentioned hadith Hasan. He mentioned Hasan, the hadith, when he referenced the hadith, he mentioned as being Hasan, that's his grading on the hadith. Then he stated, Rawahu Abu Dawud, Tirmidhi, Nasa'i, Ahmad. Then he mentioned, وقال At-Tirmidhi, hadithun Hasan. So as for what is mentioned here by Sheikh Samir in his checking of Bulugh Maram, he mentioned this hadith of Samura. Ibn Hajar rahimahullah mentioned Al-Khamsa. So Khamsa, the 5 books with Ibn Hajar, it is As-Sunan Arba, Abu Dawud, Tirmidhi, Nasa'i, Ibn Mاجه, plus Ahmad in his Musnad. So these are the 5 books. When we use the word Al-Khamsa, what he intends by this are those 5 books. Abu Dawud, Tirmidhi, Nasa'i in his Mujtaba Sugra, and also Ibn Mاجه, and the 5th being Ahmad in his Musnad. So as for what is mentioned here by Samir, if we were to pick up, you mentioned Rawahu, he mentioned Hasan, meaning hadith is Hasan according to him, is grading Rawahu Abu Dawud, Tirmidhi, Nasa'i, Ahmad. Then he mentioned قال At-Tirmidhi hadithun Hasan. That's a grading of At-Tirmidhi rahimahullah. They mentioned qultu, meaning concerned is like additional, that he wished now to say or mention something, state something. They mention Azzu Al-Hafiz, that Ibn Hajar rahimahullah ta'ala reference in this hadith, he mentioned lil-Khamsa, to the 5 books of hadith, he mentioned wahm minhu rahimahullah ta'ala, that's an error again from Ibn Hajar. So Ibn Hajar, again, he made an error regarding this particular hadith we mentioned. It is in the 5 books. And he said, the error is the hadith. Then he mentioned, what's the error? It's al-hadith laysa inda Ibn Mاجه. Min Samura. That hadith is not found in Ibn Mاجه from Samura. Then he mentioned, innama indahu an Anas. But rather, the hadith here that that is found in Ibn Mاجه is not the hadith of Samura, rather is the hadith of Anas. So an error regarding, so the hadith of the same hadith is mentioned in Ibn Mاجه, but not from on the authority of Samura. Is mentioned on the authority of Anas. Is mentioned of Anas, this hadith. So he mentioned this, and I show the preciseness of ulama of hadith. That ulama of hadith, they're very precise regarding that. They tried, so when they mention the hadith of Samura, is in the 5 books. That's not, the hadith is found in the 5 books of hadith, but on most, except for Ibn Mاجه, it is found from the hadith of Samura. But in the case of Ibn Mاجه, it is found from the hadith of Anas bin Malik. So they wish to mention those 2, the mention of those 2 matters that were error of Ibn Hajar, made by Ibn Hajar rahimahullah ta'ala. And Bashar, show concern to know that the ulama, that they're human beings, and at times they will make of error. But this error can only be spotted unless one verify and check. These errors can only be identified if one was to go back and to check. So of those, we'll give some explanation of them. So that's of the other point that they mentioned. So again, that Sheikh Abdullah Fawzan, when he mentioned these hadith also, he also highlighted that Ibn Hajar rahimahullah ta'ala, he made an error regarding the first hadith of Abu Sa'id, where they mentioned akhrajahu As-Sab'a, the hadith is not with in the At-Tirmidhi, and also the hadith of Sumara, that it is not found with Ibn Mاجه, even though he mentioned. So Ibn Mاجه, the hadith is there, but not from the hadith of Sumara, rather it's from the hadith of Anas. Then they mention regarding concerning that, as for the hadith, regarding the second hadith, that there is a khilaf between the ulama regarding the grading of the hadith of Sumara. Is the hadith authentic or not? So there's a lengthy discussion regarding that particular matter, where you find that of the ulama that they have mentioned that those who are hadith to be daif. So for example, the checking of, if we were to go to the checking of Bulugh Maram, so if we go to the checking of one of the Mashaykh who have done a work on the book of Bulugh Maram, or Sheikh Mahir Al-Fahl, that when he mentioned these hadith, so he mentioned the second hadith, so the more discussion is on the hadith, the second hadith of Samura. When he mentioned the hadith of Samura, that he mentioned that فقال اقتصر الترمذي على تحسيني, that At-Tirmidhi رحمه الله mentioned the hadith is Hasan. Then he mentioned that والصواب ضعفه, that what is correct according to him, the hadith is weak. So of the ulama who hold the hadith to be Hasan, and whoever others who may take the hadith to be weak. Then he mentioned لأدم السماء الحسن من سمرة. Then he mentioned hadith sahih, and also a hadith sahiha tukhalifu, and also other hadith which is authentic, it contradicts this. So he can somewhat then mention regarding concerning the source of hadith that there are many, but overall that the hadith is said to be of those hadith that are on the discussion between the ulama. So Shaykh Abdullah Fawzan in his explanation that there's many others who have made takhrij of the hadith, but to kind of somewhat to go in, they mention as for this hadith that they said the illal of the hadith, the area of criticism and discussion of this hadith of Samura, where a discussion between the ulama that is known, where they have a discussion regarding that the person, the narrator, the rawi that narrated upon Samura was Hasan al-Basri. So Hasan al-Basri narrates upon Samura, then Samura narrates a hadith as stated here upon the Prophet ﷺ. Then we said that there's a discussion regarding the narrations of Hasan al-Basri on Samura. There's a discussion between the ulama on this, where they discuss, did Hasan al-Basri actually heard a hadith from Samura? So if so, there's this concept, did he actually hear hadith narrated from Samura? So on this matter, Shaykh Abdullah Fawzan, that he mentioned that the ulama, they divide in this matter regarding the narration upon Hasan al-Basri on Samura, they divide into three camps or three opinions. The first of those opinions regarding this narration of Samura mentioned أنه سمع منه مطلقا, that they mentioned that Hasan al-Basri, he did hear from Samura in all the narration. He did hear from him in everything. So they affirm that Samura heard, that Hasan al-Basri, he heard from Samura, and that for them that's the case. And so for them, the hadith of Hasan al-Basri and Samura is considered to be muttasil. It is considered to be muttasil in all of the narration that are there, according to the first opinion. And they mention that of the ulama who's of this opinion, they mention, as Shaykh mentioned, Ali ibn Madini, Imam al-Bukhari, Tirmidhi, and others. So of those who take the position that Hasan al-Basri narration upon Samura, that he heard from him, and all these narrations are muttasil, that they are connected. So we have that view, and also the mention of contemporary. So they mention that Ali ibn Madini, who said it is muttasil, Imam Bukhari, Imam At-Tirmidhi, alayhim rahmatullah ta'ala jami'an. And also they mentioned that Shaykh Abdullah Fawzan, also a mention of contemporary who align with that view or take up that view. They mentioned Shaykh Abdulaziz bin Baz, rahimahullah ta'ala. So Shaykh Abdulaziz bin Baz also is of the opinion that Al-Hasan al-Basri, he heard from Samara in all his narration. So that's concerning, and also just to bear in mind that Shaykh Ibn Baz, rahimahullah ta'ala, that also he has, which is just been recent print of his own explanation of Bulugh Maram in a lengthy one over maybe 10 volumes plus. So Shaykh Ibn Baz, rahimahullah ta'ala, have a detailed explanation that is published of Shaykh bin Baz Rahimah Ta'ala, explained in the book Bulugh Maram, and that is in print. Then so that's concerning of the opinions amongst the ulama, the first opinion. The second opinion regarding Hasan al-Basri, narrating upon Sumara, that the second opinion that Hasan lam yasma' min Sumara mutlaqa, that he did not hear from him anything. The second opinion that Al-Hasan al-Basri did not hear from Sumara anything, any narration. So for them that would consider to be munqata. That the narration considered that there's a breakage between both. They did not meet at any point. Or that Hasan al-Basri narrated upon him. So it will mean that hadith, it is غير متصل في انقطاع, that there is a breakage in this isnad between both. Of others who you have Ibn Hibban of the opinion, also Ibn Ma'in that mention Madhab Yahya al-Qattan, and also they mention Ahmad bin Hanbal based upon narration of the Masail of Saleh, that Ahmad Rahimahullah Ta'ala of this view. And also others who align to that view. The third opinion that I mentioned, the second opinion also that mentioned, that what he heard from is by way of kitaba, la sama. So things that have been written, recorded, and given, not per se, or things that they have heard, not things that you have heard from directly. But he mentioned that things that have been kitaba, things that have been written. The third opinion is on this matter, أنه يعني الحسن البصري لم يسمع منه يعني من سمرة إلا حديث واحد, except for one hadith. They said we can confirm this opinion that Hasan al-Basri only heard from Samura only one hadith, and the hadith of Aqiqah. The hadith of Aqiqah, of concerning that in the matter regarding that the Aqiqah, regarding that what are the things to be done regarding the newborn child. So they mentioned that the only hadith that they can confirm that Hasan al-Basri heard from Samura. As for anything else, no. So based upon those aqwal that I mentioned between the ulama on this matter, and of those who take the third opinion, they mentioned here Imam al-Nasai, Darakutni, Bazzar, Ibn Asakir, and of those who believe that that view is more the correct view. The third opinion, that Hasan al-Basri, there's tafsil, he did hear from Samura, but only one hadith. As for all of the hadith, no. All other hadith, then no. So that's concerned a discussion on that matter. So based upon this, of the ulama, depending on the opinion that one take, will fall into one of those categories. The one who say he did hear from him, hadith sahih. Those who say he did not hear at all, hadith daif. And those who say tafsil, then they mention that he heard from only one hadith, hadith of Aqiqah, and this is not this hadith. So based upon the third opinion, this hadith is daif. But those the hadith is Hasan, based upon, they said, the other narrations that are similar, that they mention, that can somewhat strengthen hadith to husna. But that's the discussion between the ulama on this hadith. So that's concerning what is said regarding the hadith of As-Samura on this topic, where both hadith, the hadith are mentioned, are to discuss the topic concerning hukum ghusl yawmul jum'ah. The first hadith give the indication that it is wajib ghusl jum'ah, wajib ala kulli muhtalim. And muhtalim, as we'll discuss, so that hadith is in that hadith, what is apparent from a hadith, that one must perform ghusl. The second hadith that performing ghusl is something which is not compulsory, but something which is preferred to be done, based upon what is taken from the hadith. So the Shaykh even discuss the next matter, which is the matter regarding, as they discuss concerning the Prophet, as I mentioned, Ghusl Jum'ah. So Ghusl Jum'ah, as we'll discuss in more detail, is this in relation to Ghusl Jum'ah, Ghusl Salatul Jum'ah, regarding the person perform Ghusl for Salatul Jum'ah, or Ghusl is performed for the day of Jum'ah. That to be discussed. Then I mentioned that wajib in this context means something that wajib, that wajib is not that wajib, that something is haq, something to be carried out, but not in the meaning as to how the ulama of the usul have given a meaning regarding al-wajib. So the Prophet ﷺ regarding that wajib in the sense of haq is a right to be done on Jummah. So as for what now can be taken from hadith, so the Shaykh Hafidhullah Ta'ala, that he discussed concerning that the word muhtalim also, it means that person above the age of puberty. So of the signs of indicating that person is above the age of puberty, that they're able to have ihtilam, with a person that know that they can have discharge of semen. So sexual discharge of semen, if that the person have reached that stage in their growth, in their development as a young person, then the indication that the person now is above the age of puberty. And I mean concern the person above the age of puberty, that that person is not considered to be a youngster, but rather considered to be an adult Islamically, where they become responsible for their actions and will be held accountable for their actions. So that's concerning. So I mentioned that muhtalim, the person above the age of puberty, not one who's a youngster. So this hadith means the person youngster, then it will not be required for them to perform ghusl, according to the hadith. So those are the things that I mentioned regarding the general meaning of the hadith. As for what is mentioned regarding the ahkam, so as for the ahkam that is discussed in the hadith, that use mentioned some of the ahkam that is taken from the book they call Fatul Alam, regarding what the author here, he mentioned regarding the ahkam that can be taken from this hadith. That one, he discussed hukum ghusl al-Jummah. What's the ruling in performing ghusl for Yawm al-Jummah, or for Salatul Jummah, for Salat al-Jummah? They mentioned regarding concern the hukum, in what's the hukum in performing ghusl for the one who intends to participate in Salat al-Jummah. They mentioned regarding concern the general ruling regarding the first opinion. Ulama have three opinions on this matter. The author he mentioned two opinions, which is the more renowned opinions. So of the more opinion that he mentioned, two of the more renowned opinions. The first of those, wujub, that performing ghusl for Jummah is wajib. It is wajib. Then he mentioned وقول Abu Hurairah من الصحابة, Abu Sa'id Al-Khudri, Umar ibn Khattab, Ammar, and also that as mentioned by Ibn Munzir. So Ibn Munzir, I've mentioned regarding the aqwal of the ulama from the Sahaba, those are the ones who take the position that it is wajib to perform ghusl for Jummah. Then I mentioned that huwa thabit anhum, so it's something which is thabit, authenticated on Abu Hurairah, Abu Sa'id, Umar Khattab, with the exception of Ammar. غير ثابت, and so thabit anhum غير Ammar. So it is thabit on those Sahabi except for Ammar, of those that are listed. Then I mentioned that also of the others who take the position, it mentioned al-Zahiriyah, that's the view of the Zahiriyah. Riwayah and Ahmad, that Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala is of one of his opinion, that he takes this opinion. And also Ibn Munzir rahimahullah ta'ala also have mentioned that the position taken by Hasan al-Basri, Malik ibn Anas, and also Ibn Hazm, as according to what is mentioned, he mentioned in Muhalla. And of the contemporaries that they mentioned, Ibn Uthaymeen and also Shaykh Muqbil. So of ulama of contemporary times who take the position that performing ghusl yawm al-Jummah is wajib, of those Ibn Uthaymeen and also Shaykh Muqbil al-Wadi from the ulama of Yemen and others. Then they mention of the adillah that they use to come to that conclusion, the first opinion, that they mention many adillah, that they mention many adillah that they use to come to this conclusion. So of the evidence that they use, the first opinion, the evidence that they use to come to that conclusion, to strengthen their opinion, they mention other hadith. The hadith also in the Bukhari and Muslim, min hadith Ibn Umar radiyallahu anhuma, النبي عليه السلام قال إذا جاء أحدكم جمعة, if any of you was to attend جمعة فليغتسل. إذا جاء أحدكم الجمعة, if any of you were to attend جمعة, come to جمعة, فليغتسل, then he should perform al-ghusl. So it's based upon this hadith that it showed the Prophet that he commanded the one to attend Jummah, he must perform ghusl, a bath. So it said ghusl meaning a bath. And as we described that bath, how to be done. So they mentioned that ityan, the salatul Jummah, that the person is required to perform ghusl. That's one of the evidence that the hadith in the Bukhari and Muslim. Another hadith that they use, the hadith of Aisha radiallahu anha, where she mentioned the hadith, قالت قيل لهم لو اغتسلتم يوم الجمعة, that if it was said to them that it was advised that you should perform ghusl in attending Jummah. And many other hadith that they use, and other hadith, and also the hadith that is mentioned here in the chapter as mentioned by Ibn Hajar. So those hadith and other hadith of that nature, that they state that hadith indicates that it is something which is wajib to perform al-ghusl. And Sheikh Abdullah Fawzan mentioned several other hadith regarding that performing ghusl يوم الجمعة. Also the hadith they mentioned Ibn Abbas and Tawus قال Ibn Abbas ذكروا أن النبي عليه السلام قال اغتسلوا يوم الجمعة. The Prophet have mentioned that you should perform ghusl يوم الجمعة واغسلوا رؤوسكم, that you should wash your heads وإن لم تكونوا جنبا, even if you're not in a state of janaba. That they mention وأصابوا من تيب, and also you should use of a tib. That they mentioned that قال Ibn Abbas أما الغسل, the Ibn Abbas رحمه الله عنه, that he commented أما الغسل فنام. As for ghusl, yes, it is wajib to be done. أما tib, as for using of fragrance, perfume, فلا أدري, I do not know of it being wajib. So he confirmed that performing ghusl for Jummah is wajib, but then he was uncertain regarding the use of fragrance. So those are evidence that are used regarding of ghusl yawm al-Jummah and others. Evidence that is used. The second opinion in this matter, that the second opinion is that it is mustahab. That performing ghusl yawm al-Jummah, it is mustahab. And as I mentioned here, هو قول جمهور أهل العلم. It's the position taken by majority of the ulama. So majority of the ulama take the position that performing ghusl for Jummah, it is mustahab. It is preferred and encouraged to be done, but not wajib. It is not wajib. They mention قال به من الصحابة, of those among the Sahaba who have taken this position. They mentioned Ibn Abbas and also Ibn Mas'ud. Ibn Mas'ud and Ibn Abbas are of the opinion that it is not compulsory, but encouraged to be done. And I mentioned Thabit and Huma, and that opinion upon them has been authenticated. So the ulama have taken that, and of contemporaries who have taken the position, I mentioned Sheikh Abdulaziz bin Baz. Of contemporary, that Sheikh Abdulaziz bin Baz, rahimahullah ta'ala, have taken that opinion. So they mentioned al-Jumhur of the ulama will include A'immat al-Arba. So riwayat an Ahmed before, but also riwayat an Ahmed regarding that it is mustahab. So Abu Hanifa, Malik, Shafi, riwayat an Ahmed, that it is mustahab. So to be included a part of those who take the position that it is mustahab for a person to perform ghusl yawm al-Jummah and not wajib. They mentioned Anas ibn Malik. So Anas ibn Malik was mentioned before, so he'd be excluded. So overall, that Jumhur, some mentioned that A'immat al-Arba and the Madhahib are more in line with the position that it is mustahab. So regarding the Madhahib al-Arba are more in line that it is mustahab to be done. So overall, that's the view of the ulama on this particular matter. So of those who take the position that it is something which is not wajib, it is mustahab, they use the hadith of Sumara and others. But of the hadith that they use as their evidence, they use the hadith of Sumara that mentioned that the Prophet also have mentioned regarding concern that it is preferred but not wajib. they mention another hadith that upon a prophet that is in Sahih Muslim, with the Prophet have said in the hadith, Man tawadda, that the one who perform wudu, wa ahsan al-wudu, and he perform his wudu well, thumma ata al-juma, then he attends juma, fastama, and he listens, meaning to the khutbah, wa ansit, and he was silent, ghufir lahu, that his sins will be forgiven, ma baynahu wa bayna al-juma al-ukhra, from one juma to the next. And they mention وَمَنْ مَسَ al-asa, and the one who touches the gravel, فَقَدْ لَغَى, then he has fallen into lagha. So it mentioned regarding concern the note from the hadith, the share from the hadith, it mentioned مَنْ تَوَضَّى وَأَحْسَنَ الْوُضُوء ثُمَّ أَتَى الْجُمَةِ, that the one who performs wudu, then and did well, perform his wudu very well, then attends Juma, it mentioned wastama, and he listened to the khutbah, wa ansit, and he was silent, then his sins will be forgiven from one Juma to another. From one Juma to another. So you have those hadith that are mentioned, but those who kind of somewhat mention regarding that hadith, in some other hadith in the Sahih Muslim, that some narration of hadith mention wagtasil. So it mentioned man tawadda, mentioned wagtasil, that you should perform ghusl. So we have in that hadith two narrations in Sahih Muslim. Of one narration mentioned man tawadda man iktasal, the one who performed ghusl. So from that mention, that's that hadith is somewhat under that discussion regarding one wording mention al-ghusl and the other mention al-wudu. So in trying to, the ulama, as we mentioned, so in trying now to come to a conclusion, you'll find that different ulama wa mashaykh who have explained this book, Bulugh Maram, that they have come to one of those opinions. Those who are more inclined to the view of Jumhur of the ulama, that is mustahab, and those who incline toward the view that is wajib. And Bab al-Ihtiyat, then if the Bab al-Ihtiyat, the safe route is to take the position that is wajib. And the person should not, that a person that perform ghusl regardless. The person performing ghusl regardless, to ensure that, as they mentioned that Sheikh Abdullah Fawzan, that mentioned that regarding concern the hadith, that say it is wajib. The hadith by way of authenticity, they are that the most part they are more clear on that topic. That is wajib. The hadith that is mentioned, the hadith of Abu Sa'id, it is clear regarding that it is wajib in its wording, and also you'll find those hadith that they are aqwa regarding isnad, regarding the authenticity, that they are more stronger. So, and the hadith regarding Sahih Muslim, the mention of the hadith that they mention of the war, the stronger hadith, and that of that it is used, that it mentioned regarding some narration mentioned manik tasal. So based upon that, it have that discussion. As I said, no, some of the mashaykh who have explained Bulugh Maram of contemporary, that some lean towards wajib and some lean towards mustahab. And the safe route is for a person to perform ghusl. The safest route is for a person to perform al-ghusl yawmul jum'ah. And I mentioned the hadith that, so you have all the discussion on with the hadith, and many more can be said, but overall, that a next matter, just of the next matter regarding ghusl yawmul jum'ah, that of those who have explained, I mentioned that ghusl yawmul jum'ah, Al-Khattabi, rahimahullah ta'ala, that he mentioned, and others that I've mentioned, also Ibn Rajab, rahimahullah ta'ala, have also mentioned the same thing, that they have mentioned that Khattabi, wa ghayru, and others who have mentioned, ijma, there's a consensus, ala anna al-ghusl, that performing ghusl, laysa shartan, is not a condition, fi sihhati salat, for the person's salat, for the person's Juma salat to be valid. So it's not a condition that for the person's salat to be valid, he must perform ghusl on Juma. Then I mention وَأَنَّهَا تُسَهْ biduni, that also the person's salat, it is valid without him performing ghusl. The person's salat, if the person was to not perform ghusl and attend Salatul Jummah, his salat is still valid. So they mention that it's not a condition, so it's not a condition for a salat to be, or a prerequisite for salat to be accepted. And so I mentioned that Ibn Rajab rahimahullah ta'ala in his Fath al-Bari, he mentioned this, and also in Nail Autar, Shawkani also say the same, and has also quoted by other on Khattabi. The next of the matter that is discussed regarding this topic, Hal Ghusl Lis-Salat Al-Jum'ah or Lil Al-Yawm. Is performing Ghusl, is it for Jum'ah, attending Jum'ah, or is for the day of Jum'ah? So the person who perform Ghusl, is the person doing so because of attending Jum'ah, or is it being done because of the day of Jum'ah? So that's the discussion between some of the ulama on this matter. So of the ulama who have mentioned that based upon the hadith that have been mentioned, that these hadith that they indicate regarding concerning that the ghusl is for Jum'ah, not for the day. Ghusl is performed for the salat, not for the day of Jum'ah. So those who mention that it is not done for the day, what will mean by this, what will come with this, attached to this. For example, the person, the one who say it is for Salatul Jum'ah, it has to be performed before Jum'ah. Before Salatul Jum'ah. So whatever time it is Jum'ah, the person has to perform ghusl before that time. Those who say it is for the day, with them, the person can perform ghusl before Jum'ah, and it is valid, and also it will perform after Jum'ah, it's still valid. Because it's done for the day, not for the salah. So that's the difference between both calls. So the ones who say ghusl is for the salat, it must be done before the person attend Salatul Jum'ah. If it's done after, then the person is in error. If those who say it is done for the day, then he does it anytime in the day, and the day, as we'll make that, the day for them will be from after Salatul Fajr to the Fajr up until Maghrib. Up until till Maghrib. As that's the day of Jum'ah. That's the day of Jum'ah, which will be the daylight. So that's concerned aqwal of the ulama on that matter, that Jumhur of the ulama mentioned it is done for Salatul Jum'ah, not for the day of Jum'ah. That's the qawl of Jumhur of the ulama. And the Zahiriyah, that they have the view that is done for the day of Jum'ah. It is done for the day of Jum'ah. And I mentioned the hadith, the hadith Abu Sa'id, Ghusl Yawmul Jum'ah. So as I mentioned, the narration said, Ghusl Yawmul Jum'ah. So they mentioned about the day, but they mentioned that what is intended is Salat Al-Jum'ah. Salat Al-Jum'ah. As other narration clarify this matter. The next of those things that are covered. So as for if it is Salatul Jum'ah, that they'll discuss at what time the person perform ghusl. At what time the person perform al-ghusl. So what? Ghusl al-Jum'ah. What's the time performing Salat al-Jum'ah? Jumhur of the ulama, that they mentioned that is done during the nahar, Yawmul Jum'ah. It's done during the daylight hours of Yawmul Jum'ah. It will done during the daylight hours for it to be, and it is not la yudzi min al-layl. It's not allowed to be done during the night of Jum'ah. And that night will be the night that before Friday. Will be Thursday night. Is not allowed to be done Thursday night. Or Thursday before Salat al-Fajr. So anytime before Salat al-Fajr on Friday of Jum'ah is not allowed. And has to be done, according to Jumhur, it has to be done after Fajr. After after Fajr, then that's the time for Jum'ah, which is Nahar. And for them, it starts with يبتدع, it starts من طلوع الفجر It starts from Tulu al-Fajr ila Ghurub al-Shams. From the time that Fajr starts, they say the dawn, until Fajr, until Maghrib comes in. As for Qabla Tulu al-Fajr, then that's considered to be from the night. That's a part of the night. So for them, anytime before Tulu al-Fajr, then that's considered to be a part of the night. So for them, Laysa min al-yawm is not from the day. So that will be during the daylight, and the daylight for them of that day start from Tulu al-Fajr, from dawn until right before Maghrib. Anything before Fajr is not valid. And I mentioned that's the qawla as-sahih. So the person who was to perform ghusl the night before Jummah or before Fajr, it does not count. It does not count. And it will not be considered to have fulfilled what was required of them regarding performing ghusl for Yawm al-Jummah or for Salat al-Jummah. They discuss the next matter. Al-Yajib ala-man la yaltazimuhu al-Jummah al-Ghusl. The one who is not required for them to be present at Jummah. Is it also for them to perform ghusl? What's the rule regarding then the person who is not present for Jummah or not have a reason to attend Jummah? Is it compulsory upon them to perform ghusl? They mention ذهب جمهور أهل العلم majority of the ulama إلى أنه لا يلزمهم الغسل. Those who are, maybe the person who's ill, the person who's a musafir, the woman, then ghusl upon them is not wajib. Ghusl upon them, it is not wajib. Unless they intend to go for Jummah. But overall I mentioned for those people it's not wajib. That the general ruling that for those category of people, ghusl, the person who's ill, is unable to, the person who's very ill, the person who's the female, that ghusl, that Jummah is not wajib upon them, that and the likes. So the ones who Jummah is not wajib upon them, is it for them to perform ghusl? I said if they intend, it's not wajib, that's called jumhur of the ulama. And I mentioned that of those who take this view, they mention Sa'id ibn Jubair, Mujahid, Ta'awus, Abu Thur, Wajd al-Shafi'iyya, that it is not compulsory upon them to perform ghusl. The Prophet mentioned the Prophet said, ghusl yawm al-Jummah wajib ala kulli muhtalim min kansara. The person who goes out for, so that's the one who it is compulsory upon them to participate in Jummah. As for those one which is not compulsory, such as I mentioned that musafir, nisa, marid, the person who's a abid, that Jummah is not wajib upon them, that ghusl is not wajib upon them. So they mentioned that of those that's that of the view taken by Jumhur of the ulama, that it is not compulsory upon them. Is not compulsory upon them. Of the ulama mentioned that anyone who attends Jummah, regardless of whether it is compulsory upon them or not, so anyone who attends Jummah, then it becomes wajib upon them to perform ghusl. So the woman who intends to go out for Jummah, even though it's not wajib upon her, if she intends to participate in Jummah, or a person who's a musafir, he's traveling, but he intends to go participate in Jummah, to attend Salatul Jummah. So he's a musafir, he's in that city, passing through, but he's there for the time of Salatul Jummah, and he wants to participate in Salatul Jummah. They mention that it becomes no compulsory upon them. So the female, who is not ordinarily compulsory upon them to participate in Jummah, but if she, the female who intends to go to Jummah, it becomes wajib upon them to attend to perform al-ghusl. But of the ulama who mentioned that, also for them also it is still mustahab. Because so of those who mentioned it is still mustahab upon those group of people to perform ghusl, not wajib, but those who mentioned it is wajib upon them to attend Jummah, as in Hadith of the Prophet man ata minkum al-Jummah. The Prophet ﷺ mentioned, man ata minkum, that the one Jummah, the one from those amongst you who attend Jummah, فَلْيَغْتَسِلْ. They should perform al-ghusl. They should perform al-ghusl. Says that based upon this, anyone who attends Jummah, then it becomes compulsory upon them to perform al-ghusl, except for a child below puberty. Except for a child below puberty, then their case is different. So they mentioned that the person who is above the age of puberty, man, woman, who attends Jummah, whether is a musafir or is muqim, local, residential, if they intend to go to Jummah, then they have to perform ghusl. They have to perform ghusl becomes upon them. You have some other masahil that I mentioned, but we'll discuss those other masahil we'll stop here inshallah ta'ala and discuss some other masahil that are included in this discussion regarding ghusl yawm al-Jummah in the next session. So we'll stop here regarding these masail. So of those ones that we have covered, that we have discussed regarding the hadith, the two hadith that I mentioned by the author, and some errors of Ibn Hajar rahimahullah regarding concerning al-abzu, that referencing these hadith. Also we discussed the hadith of Sumara and what is said by the ulama regarding the hukum of that hadith, whether it's authentic or not. Then we discuss regarding the masail, whether the hadith. So those two hadith, they discuss the mawdu, the topic regarding performing ghusl for yawm al-Jummah. One hadith indicates it is wajib and other indicates that's not the case. So how to harmonize between those hadith and how they are discussed between the ulama. So based upon those hadith and others hadith like those, the ulama, they fall into three opinions. We mentioned two, but we mention now the third. So the two opinions that are more famous, that it is wajib and taken by some of the ulama, all that is mustahab, and that's a view taken by a majority of the ulama, that performing ghusl for yawm al-Jummah is mustahab. There's a third opinion mentioned by Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, that is amongst the Hanabila of one view in each, that some of the Hanabila that take the position that is said tafsil. If the person did something, it becomes wajib. If an act that requires ghusl, that person state of janaba, then becomes wajib. So if anything was to occur, that if not anything of that requires ghusl occurs, then it becomes mustahab. So the person wake up after Jummah in a state of janaba, then becomes compulsory upon them to perform that ghusl because of the janaba. But overall, you have those opinions, but the two famous ones are there. Then we may discuss regarding of those masail, so the hukum. Then we discuss matters pertaining to the ones who is not required for them to attend Jummah, but they are present. Are they also required to perform ghusl? And also cases that we mentioned. So those are some of the cases that we mentioned regarding Salat al-Jummah and ghusl yawm al-Jummah. So that inshallah ta'ala will stop for today, and we'll discuss other masail in the next session relating to ghusl yawm al-Jummah. وبالله تعالى توفيق وهذه إلى سبيل والآخر والحمد لله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.